Welcome back to Family Dynamic Conversations podcast, where I explore the stories behind the storytellers, exploring how family connections and relationships kind of shape the art we create and the life we live. I'm your host, Janice Kingsbury, and today my guest is Jon McGoran, master of suspense, genre bender, and mind-bending everything from biotech thrillers to dystopian coming-of-age sagas. Whether you know him as the author of the gripping The Price of Everything, his newest book that just came out earlier this year, or the voice behind Spliced trilogy. Jon's work challenges readers to face the intersections of technology, power, and the most important human connection. Behind every high-stakes plot is a beating heart. So we're going to explore characters navigating fractured family systems and the test of strength and those bonds. And Jon's story speaks to what it means to belong, protect, and break free. So grab a cup of coffee or a beverage of your choice and join us as we explore the dynamic worlds Jon McGoran creates. Very real family themes that run through them. Family Dynamic Conversations, where families and stories come in all shapes and sizes. I come from a family of 12. You may be an only child. What matters is caring, sharing, and finding ways to relate to one another. Thank you so much for joining me, Jon. This is a privilege, and it's so good to see you.
Thank you, Janice. I'm really, really happy to be here, and it's great to see you, too. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So fun. So please visit Jon's website, jonmcgoran.com, for all of his... No H. Yeah.
No H. Always important.
I always edit that and I'll put that little above your head. It's very easy. Jon has so many creative avenues. So from your website, when not writing novels and short fiction or co-hosting the Liars Club podcast, Jon teaches at Drexel University's Creative Writing MFA program and works as a freelance writer, developmental editor, and writing coach. You are an amazing and accomplished human. Thank you so much for being here. How does that make you feel when I list all those things going on in your life?
Yeah, it makes me feel great. It makes me feel great. It really does. It's like, oh, I guess I'm not so bad. All right. Am I,
Put that little shot in your arm every morning.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. Do you still do the podcast?
No. It's, I mean, technically on hiatus. We haven't officially put it away for good, but it's been, I guess, a year and a half or so, maybe 2 years since we did it. We did over 200 episodes, so it was a good
wow.
It was a good run.
Yeah.
We've talked about bringing it back in some form or another.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't active so that I could use it to promote my own work. When I had a new book coming out, it's like do 200 episodes, and then when you got a book coming out, it's like, oh, well, I guess we'll stop doing that for a while. Got to make sure there's no benefit accrued from it,
I'm like, that's not a conflict of interest, right? It's definitely something you should be shouting from the rooftops.
Yeah. Yep.
Very cool. Yeah, I went back to listen to a few. And besides making your guests very interesting, that you as hosts are entertaining yourselves, but you bring out the real person of your guest. And I think the best part, really.
Yeah. I think that the conversational, the way it is set up, it's like one person interviewing and then several other kind of co-hosts or non-lead interviewers or whatever. And it makes it very conversational. I think it does kind of set people at ease, even sometimes like despite themselves, they just get, they might feel like they're nervous at first, but then they're like, oh, we're just joking around with a bunch of knuckleheads. And then you get these great conversations that come out. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
And I find that you bring most of the humor.
Yeah, well.
And I appreciate that. So first, let's get into your personal family dynamics. Mm-hmm. And I always start with asking how many in your family and what number are you in that order?
So I am the youngest of 4 children.
Okay. And you had mentioned also that you have parents that are Irish immigrants. Is that right?
Yeah. My parents have both passed, but they met and they grew up and got married in Ireland before they came over here in like the late 50s. They lived in Canada for a couple of years. My dad was an architect, and he had got work in Canada and then came down to Philadelphia in, I think, like 57-ish.
Okay.
Maybe 56.
And with both parents being Irish, I hear no brogue whatsoever in your speech.
Well, so that's an interesting thing you say that, because getting to the role of like birth order and
Yeah.
family dynamics and these things, my oldest sister did. She doesn't
Oh,
now, but when she was a kid, by all
interesting.
accounts, she had a pretty thick Irish brogue,
It's
which,
awesome.
now by the time I came around, my parents had probably lost a bit of their accent. I
Yeah,
had three older siblings who
right.
were, I mean, my oldest sister Maeve might have had a bit of of an accent still at that point, but the younger two siblings, Hugh and Allison, the middle two, they didn't. So I wasn't surrounded by just Irish sounding speakers. So it's interesting. It's like, you grow a couple years difference
Right.
makes a difference. Yeah.
Well, in my intro, I am number 11 out of 12.
Oh, wow.
And I was just hearing another podcast about how each child has a different set of parents. The first child has a new parents bringing up a
Yep.
human being that they've never, done before.
Totally.
Second, third, fourth all have different parents because they experience different things. They treat each child differently because they have life experience, and
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's kind of crazy when you think about.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And and really it's not just family, and it's the world at large as well.
True.
And one of the things that is really clear, I tend to write these kind of contemporary science thrillers or near future science fiction thrillers.
Yeah.
And a lot of the underlying themes are about the changes in society, whether it's technological or sociological or
Sure.
political or whatever.
Yeah.
And obviously the world in recent decades has begun changing much more rapidly,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's a pretty breakneck pace right now, which means that it's not just your parents who are different. The entire world is different. If 3 years difference, I kid with my wife a lot. She's 3 years younger than me. And every now and again, we'll be talking about something from like the 70s or early 80s or whatever.
Yeah.
And she'll not, she won't remember. And I was like, oh, it's because you're so young. It was like before your time. And I'm mostly joking, although sometimes it's true. It's like when
Years can make
that
a
difference
difference.
between age 7 and 10 or something,
Yeah,
you might have a very different pop culture experience.
for sure.
But now, it's just like the world works it works differently in the space of a
Completely.
couple of years.
Yeah.
You look at the impact of generative AI in the last couple of years, it's a different world. You
For
look at the
sure.
seismic political changes, the world is changing so rapidly. And I wonder, I think it's such a, I'm starting to see it for sure, as I get older, that, you feel less and less at home in your world. The world that learned when you were growing up, that forms your kind of bedrock understanding of the world and how it works,
Yeah.
is getting further and further away. My in-laws are in their 80s and 90s, and, huge portions of the world just don't make sense to them.
No.
And I think about how gently the world has been changing for most of their lives,
Right.
compared to now. Yeah, the changes, and even the minutia. Just like I think about this a lot, I guess, as a science fiction writer, the operating system updates. It's like people spend so much time online. That's like a large part of their natural environment.
Yes.
And like the rules of physics, the rules that govern them can just like change and do with great regularity. And it's like, oh, this used to work and now it doesn't. Like, what the hell is going on?
Right. When starting a podcast when you're 63 or
Yes,
64,
exactly.
going,
Yeah.
wait, the update did what? You're changing it.
Exactly.
Why?
Yes. Yes.
I just got comfortable doing it, editing this way. Now, did you also have a religious upbringing at all?
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I had this really, so both my parents, were from Ireland. They were Irish Catholic.
Irish Catholic. Okay.
So I've pretty much always been agnostic. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm atheist, but
Okay.
because I just like, I don't know, that's kind of my, my
Curious minds. Yeah.
bedrock tenet. But so I do, just not to get too off track too quickly.
No, go ahead.
I remember in second grade when the priest would come in to teach us religion, and he came in to tell us about faith. And I was just always a very inquisitive kid. I was always asking questions. I mean, it's kind of a pain in the ass, I'm sure, but he was talking about how, you had to accept what they were telling you on faith, and if you kind of thought about it and studied it and decide, and I asked him, if you thought about it and studied it and said, oh, well, you know what, I've come to the same conclusion, that wasn't really good because that you weren't accepting it on faith. And I was like, oh, you lost me, and I was like gone. I had another 6 years of Catholic school to go through, but when I was like I guess when I was in the 7th grade, basically my entire family except for my mother kind of, well, not really believe in this
Separated.
stuff, So yeah, my oldest sister, who had gone through 8 years at this Catholic grade school and 4 years at a Catholic high school and 1 year at a Catholic college, transferred to Antioch, which was kind of a hotbed of, radicalism. And then my other sister, went through 8 years in this grade school, 1 year of Catholic high school, and then transferred to public high school. My brother left the grade school, went to public high school. I was trying to, and then my dad kind of said, you know what, I'm an atheist. And my mom was still like this like believer,
Yeah.
So I mean, I can't imagine. I never really talked to her about it in depth. What that must have felt to her,
Right.
Just like the entire. And I had to go to church because I was still in the school. So it was like she and I would be going to church. Everybody else was like, yeah, no. It was. So yeah, the role of religion has changed in our family over the years.
Definitely. And I'm sure influenced how you write. But I'm thinking immigrant parents and Catholic upbringing. And if I could do a Groucho Marx, I mean, have you thought about generational trauma in your books, or have you put that in already?
As far as generational trauma goes, I haven't written that much about it, but I am fascinated by it. In recent years, I've become increasingly fascinated by it as it relates to like epigenetics and how kind of, people think of their DNA as this like solid blueprint, and it's not. And it's fascinating how drastically and concretely kind of generational trauma can impact their offspring's genetic makeup.
For sure.
It's wild. It's wild.
Yeah.
And I've toyed with it. I have some story ideas looking at that situation. I mean, one of the this is not about generational trauma, but one of the things that kind of a biological concept that I find fascinating is locusts, and how their genes manifest differently based on kind of like environmental pressure, based on famine or whatever. And so I've been thinking about that in terms of climate change, and what if a similar dynamic arose among humanity, that the pressures of climate change and the world that we are creating, if that could conceivably have some sort of widespread
crazy effect.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's fascinating, and I think it's very possible that it could. There's been some really fascinating science. Some of it, going back to like World War II. I think there was in the Netherlands, I think it was, where a Nazi occupation led to massive starvation, and this one population, their genome was altered by it, for multiple generations. I forget exactly what the how it manifested.
See that happen.
But it was it was like, this actually happened, and it brings to mind all sorts of oppression and horrible things happening to people around the world, and how that's going to manifest not just culturally, not just familially, but actually as part of their biology. Fascinating. Yeah.
Well, the brain will somehow tell the body, okay, this is going to be really hot for the next 50 years. Let's make sure that our skin and our whatever creates this, protective layer of some kind.
Well, and as with locusts, those changes might not be, they're not always the best move,
Right.
So, sometimes the things that the body does or the mind does aren't always in the best interests of the animal experiencing them.
Well, and I just read recently how the eyes, if you wear polarized sunglasses, the brain doesn't think to create melanin to protect the skin. So, you
really?
Yeah, you think that I'm going to
Huh.
protect my eyes with this polarization, but then the brain goes, well, I guess you don't need sunblock in the
Right.
skin,
Oh,
so but
that's
you're going to get
fascinating.
burnt. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's
Oh,
just
I hadn't
like,
heard that. That's really interesting. I mean, the
yeah,
eyes, the whole eye brain thing is fascinating. There's this one, again, a little digression, but I just think it's really fascinating. Um,
yeah,
so your eyes see things upside down. The image that is imprinted on your retinas goes through your lens and
okay.
focuses on your retina, and the image that it focuses is upside down, and then your brain transposes it so that you can exist in the world. So scientists did this
Did
fascinating
not know
experiment.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So they did this experiment. They gave people these special glasses that made everything look upside down,
That's
and
crazy.
they would wear these glasses, and after like an hour or so, they would start to get these like blinding headaches and start to feel nauseous and start to, like, all these things would, they would
Wow.
experience these intense physical symptoms, and then everything would flip up right side up. The brain would compensate for the signal that was coming to it, and then they could see okay, and then they would start to feel better, and then when they took the glasses off, the world would switch upside down, and then after a little while they would get blinding headaches and nausea, and then it would flip back right back up again. So it really, I
Wow.
mean, it's like there's this whole, for millennia, people have been the philosophical kind of questions about how much to trust your senses, and not much. It's like not much.
It's going down by the minute.
It kind of is, right?
How much I trust anything anymore. Oh my God. That's crazy. So we're going to get back to a little bit of the sibling birth order and how the birth order creates the characters for you. How much
Mm-hmm.
have you put into that?
Yeah, there's a couple of sibling relationships that I've written that I think really kind of go to this in a way that I find really fascinating. And in both of them, one was in my first three books I wrote. They were forensic thrillers under a pen name, D.H. Dublin,
Okay.
and one of them, Freezer Burn, which is still one of my favorite books. I liked it. Nobody read it, so oh well.
They
But
will now.
but
Freezer burn. Go and get it.
Freezer Burn, yeah, by D.H. Dublin. Yeah,
There you
it's
go.
out there banging around. Um, it's almost 20 years old, so
Oh,
I'll feel okay about throwing spoilers out there. There were these two main characters who were half brothers, and their
okay.
father was this kind of gangster who didn't go legit. He was just successful enough that he became rich enough that he could kind of pretend to be legit. He probably did invest into legitimate businesses and create his fortune that way as well.
Excuse me. Never
Yeah.
mind. Go ahead.
Yeah, right, exactly. But part of the premise was that one of the characters, the older brother, was raised by a gangster, and the younger character was raised by a former gangster who was who was married and who was trying to fit in with genteel society and went to all the better schools, and they were entirely different people. And the younger son basically went off and had a career. We went to good school, went to good colleges, established a good career. And the older brother basically was the capo in the criminal enterprise, and just that dynamic. I was fascinated by that,
Yeah.
and the different ways that kind of came to the fore. And it hasn't been sold or produced or anything, but one of the things that I've been working on more recently is a TV show
Great.
called Wish You Were Here. And there's a similar dynamic in that. One of the main characters is a criminal, and he had his older daughter when he was just like a young thug,
Okay.
and he had nothing to do with the mother. And then he went to jail, so he never saw the daughter at all until he got out. And then he gets out, and she has grown up on the streets. She's been abandoned by her mother and her father. And then he also has this young daughter who is his little princess, and now he's still a gangster, but now he's not like a young thug. Now he's like the head of a criminal organization with a lot of resources, and and I'm fascinated by that dynamic.
Well,
Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
I was going to say there's so much to unfold there, but the idea, my husband is one of two families. So his mom and dad created him, but they each had their own children. So
Right.
a lot of step siblings. And by his parents, he's considered the golden child. And by his siblings, he's just gets their attention, both of their attention, So, but in your story where this father is completely different for one child and a princess of another, so when you're writing these things, when you're picturing this and you're doing your outline, you have this idea, but then you sit there and go into each character and go, okay, she was born first, so she's got, she's abandoned, do you list all these characteristics?
Usually, yeah. For the main characters, yes. I'm a huge outliner. I write very elaborate outlines before I start writing the first draft. And a lot of outliners write much more spare outlines, but a lot of writers write very, very lengthy character sketches.
Okay.
And they write these biographies. Some people, I know people who write, they like interview their characters. They write a written interview with the character and kind of get to know them that way.
Nice.
A big part of my process, people think of outlining as essentially about plot, and it is primarily about plot. But one of the things that I've come to really appreciate about that part of my process over the years is that I do write these kind of character sketches, but they're not very elaborate.
Okay.
But in the outlining process, that is so thorough that it really helps me get to know the characters much, much better than I otherwise would. But that said, for the main characters, like that family relationships and birth order is definitely something that would be a part of the sketch specific things that I sketch out for each character.
Yeah, because in the little bit of writing that I did, the idea of having this character kind of summarized and attitudes and characteristics and whatnot, but then I would get so involved in the story that I would sit there and think, okay, how would she react to such a situation? But to go back and try and read the full encapsulation of that character and then try to bring it back into the story, my brain just couldn't contain all that, because you sound like your characters, and we read that your characters are very complex and they have a lot going on. You have an idea of what now is going to happen in this chapter, but you refer back to the characters on how they would react.
I mean, I think for the most part, ideally, so for like some of the secondary characters, yes, and the tertiary characters, yes. The main characters, ideally, you have enough of it uploaded
already.
You kind of, that's the ideal, is that you get to know them so well that
here's what they do.
Yeah, exactly. So a couple of my books, like the Spliced books, this was kind of daring, and I didn't actually get much grief about it, but it is something that some writers have gotten pushback on. I wrote it in the first person, and my main character was a 16-year-old girl.
Okay.
And actually the D.H. Dublin books, they were not for first person, but the protagonist was a woman. The point of view character was a woman as well.
Okay.
Which was a challenge, but I as far as, I think that you need to know all of your characters well. And so people are like, well, how can you write a female point of view character? And it's like, that's like asking, how can you write a female character? Because, I mean,
I have to write a male character. So
yeah, right. Exactly. And you can't, you have
reference.
to, if you only understand half of the people in the world, and understand, I use, of course, I don't understand any of the people in the world, including myself. But I feel like I have, a notion. Yeah, just that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think it was, speaking of Spliced, your character Jiminy, and did she have a stepbrother or a real brother in that story? There was a real strong bond there.
It was a real brother, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she was a full biological brother, yeah.
The sibling knowledge, you like to create that kind of tension in family situations. Did you have that growing up too?
Always some tension. I'm pretty close with my siblings, and I think for the most part, we got along pretty well growing up. My brother and I would fight a lot when we were little. I imagine I was very annoying. Not like now.
Brother closest to you?
So there's the two sisters. My oldest sister is 7 years older. My other sister is 4 years older. My brother's 3 years older.
Okay, so
and I'm the
2
youngest.
sisters
Yeah.
then so the brother is the one you fight with. Okay.
Yeah, but like, so one of the things in Spliced
Yeah.
that I thought was, and I kind of touch on it. So it's this Jimmy and her brother. And Jimmy, by the way, is named after, Jimmy is short for Dimphna, and Jimmy and Dimphna are named after my Aunt Dimphna, who we all knew as Aunt Jimmy, who was awesome. Their father died. He's no longer with the family.
Okay.
And that's one of those things that he knew the father and she didn't really get to. Even just it's a couple of years difference, that can be a huge couple of years.
Right.
So I've had, here's an interesting story. And it just kind of, I learned this a few years ago. I was being interviewed. I think it was, actually, I guess it was quite a while ago, because I was being interviewed for the D.H. Dublin books by a local newspaper for the Irish expat community, the kind of the diaspora,
Nice.
the Irish Examiner. And,
Cool.
and I kind of interviewed my siblings, just to kind of refresh my memory about my parents, how they came over and when and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And the grandfather on my mother's side, her family had owned and run a kind of Irish Republican newspaper in Wexford, the town that they were from.
Okay.
It was kind of a well-known separatist newspaper that had been in the family for a couple of generations. And I learned that my great-grandfather actually came to the States in like the 1800s as a journalist to travel with Buffalo Bill Cody. And cover him. Yeah. So it was just like, and they all knew it, and that's like one of those things that is like, it had been a talking point before I was around,
Right.
And I think like those are the kinds of things, like there are very few photos of me as a child, there's very few, there's very little film of me as a child, because like, the novelty kind of wore off by number 4, it's like, okay, whatever, so it's like every now and again, a couple of times in my life, the family every couple of decades would get together and look at some of these old films. I'm like, where am I? It's like, I'm just like not there. So it's,
well, think about being number 11 out of 12.
Yeah.
That novelty's
right?
way gone.
Yeah,
but that's
sure.
okay.
I'm sure.
Yeah, and that's mainly why I started the podcast, is because I wanted to talk to family and get different perspectives. Not a lot of them want to talk on the podcast. I think I have one sister that's like, sure, I'll talk. And so, but it's amazing the different perspectives that each sibling has in their life, in their knowing their history. So true. Yeah.
Yep,
that's
absolutely.
crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. So, embracing technology, I went to ChatGPT.
Oh, wow. Okay.
To say, all right, I'm interviewing Jon McGoran, author of Price of Everything, and what would be some good family dynamic questions that I could ask him? So, you know what? Before we do that, your book just came out earlier this year. When was it released?
Out in April.
April. Okay. Can you give us a synopsis of this very exciting book?
Oh, sure. So I think character is the most important thing in fiction. I think that people aren't going to enjoy your plot. People aren't going to get your themes. Nothing's going to happen if the characters don't pull them in.
Right.
But I don't start with character. I start with ideas, and then I kind of populate once I figure out the world it is that I'm writing about, like who would be in that world.
Yeah.
So it's seeming more and more apropos as the
kind of crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So it's near future. It's in the wake of a cyber war. So there's a couple things going on. Climate change has continued unabated, unmitigated. It's getting really bad. So has wealth disparity and the growth of corporate oligarchies and the billionaire class, and just kind of and part of what the book is about is the intersection of the two. How that wealth disparity, how the billionaires and having having corporations have so much power is definitely contributing to climate change.
Yes.
It's near future, maybe 30 years from now. In the wake of a cyber war, there is no more internet. There's no more e-commerce. There's no more electronic finance. So it's this modern society that has had to revert to a cash basis. And in order to make it work, the federal government starts printing these super high denomination bills on this high tech plastic substrate. So instead of, I think right now, the largest denomination in actual circulation is the 100. And there have been 500s in the past, and there have been bigger denominations, not widespread in the past.
I've never seen them.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So in order to move all that cash around, they use drones and stuff, armored, weaponized drones. But they also have these elite couriers. Part of it is about the people who would do this and the worlds that would push someone to do this, because they have to, in order to become a courier, they have to agree to have a titanium cuff grafted onto the bones in their wrist. That they can chain their attaché case to carry the money, and they swear an oath that the delivery gets where it's going, or they accept the consequences, which is death. The main character has been doing this for about 10 years, and basically he did it because there were no other jobs. But he gets to a delivery and he opens the attaché case and it's empty. The money has vanished, and he knows it was just in there. He knows nobody stole it, but he's on the hook. So he's trying to figure out what happened to it. And as the story goes on, this starts happening all over in different places and around New York. The money is just disappearing, and people are, assuming it's being stolen, and, there's mayhem breaking out. So he has to get to the bottom of what is going on so he can prove that he didn't take the money. And what's going on is really big. And, I can't go in, I don't want to spoil it. Climate change is a huge factor. Geoengineering is a part of it, which is a technology that I'm giving a talk about it this afternoon. That I think is really, really fascinating. I worked with for a little bit with this great filmmaker, a friend of mine, Ben Kalina, who he's a documentarian, and he made this amazing documentary, Shored Up, about beach replenishment and trying to kind of fight off the natural processes. And it ended up being a lot about Superstorm Sandy, so that was a big part of it. But he's got this documentary, which is just about to hit the festival circuit, called Plan C for Civilization, about geoengineering, which is like technologies that, instead of trying to prevent climate change, kind of try to mitigate its effects by cooling the planet, reflecting sunlight or capturing the carbon instead of preventing it from getting into the atmosphere in the first place. So the main characters are this courier, and then there's this scientist, this woman named Gloriana, who is a brilliant molecular biologist who has been traumatized by climate disasters, climate change, which was submerging her home country, and also oil spills. And that's it in a nutshell. It's big, the thing that is uncovered, and I think it's also it's kind of dystopian, but I think there is hope.
So, listeners, here's one of the descriptions I read. Pierce is caught between the wrath of the recipient, ruthless enforcers from the Couriers Guild, and a shadowy corporate conspiracy. It sets off a feral chain reaction, guns drawn, body count rising, and Pierce pounding his way through ambushes and betrayals. Yikes. I'm in.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, I like with my wheelhouse. What I really like to do is I like books that have a lot of action, that have some romance, that have some humor, but that is a lot of action, a lot of plot, so that I can kind of discuss these kind of bigger ideas, but without bogging things down. I think that's
preaching at people.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to be pedantic. You don't want to be preaching or lecturing. You want to tell a good story, and then hopefully have the reader think about the ideas when they're done.
Well, it's the ripple effect of all these things coming together, colliding, and realizing realistically, this shit's happening.
Yeah. Yep.
So, how many drafts did you go through with this book? And when did you start thinking about it too? Because it's so timely.
Some of the ideas in it I've been thinking about for 20 years.
Wow.
There's a lot of ideas in this book. And a lot of them were kind of like disparate. They were separate ideas. So it didn't start with this one idea and then expand, which is how I usually do it.
Yeah.
but it started with an idea, and as it expanded, I realized that these other things that I've been thinking about for a long time just naturally made their way into it.
Yeah. That's
So,
so
cool. One of, and I love, sometimes I love the minutia in the Spliced books. Part of the world building was that it was post peak oil and there was energy scarcity. Okay. And for the most part, society worked because technology had caught up with it, and everything that used electricity was super, super efficient. Okay. But when you are dealing with super, super efficient devices or end users and not a lot of energy to start with because of the scarcity, transmission becomes a really important part of the world, and transmission loss. And I kind of, I was just playing with ideas, but in the Spliced books, one of the things is that sprawl has kind of been laid to waste, and everything has contracted into towns and cities so that the energy doesn't have to be transmitted in these, across these long lines. Right. Yeah. Which is like, it's kind of like a wonky little thing. I don't go into depth in it, it's just like kind of, but it's kind of the thinking that goes behind the world that's built. Right, exactly. And so in this world, the part of the world building, is that money, and so a couple of things that I learned while I was writing this, while I was researching this.
I was going to ask.
And I always do a lot of research, and that's part of the fun. It can be a bit much, but I learned this just fascinating and very counterintuitive factoid about American money, about U.S. money. And that is that the most common paper money in circulation of American currency is the $100 bill.
Not the $1 bill.
Not the $1 bill. Not the 20. So I think there's 14 billion ones and 12 billion 20s and 19 billion hundreds. And the reason why that is because for people who are cut off from the legitimate banking system, mostly authoritarian strongmen and narco traffickers, that's how they store their wealth. They have pallets of $100 bills in their strong rooms, and they're not making any interest on it, but that's okay because they're just making enough money that it doesn't matter. Yeah. And that was one of the things that led me down this path. But so I kind of jokingly refer to this book, and have for some time now, as my most celebrated work because of how many times I finished. Let's go celebrate. I have a toast to having finished it. And then I sent it to my agent. It's like, oh yeah, no, it's not finished at all. It's so I actually started writing the first draft of this book, which means already outlined for the first version in 2015. So my gosh. I think I've written 4 or 5 other books since then while I was working on this. So I would put it aside and work on the next one and, do this and do that.
That just makes my brain explode thinking you've got so many different stories in your head.
Well, every story that you write has this huge opportunity cost in other stories that you're not writing. And I am, I am one of those, I'm a bit of an ADHD or an ADD head, I guess. I'm not that active. But I'm just constantly having ideas for stories. Yeah. And even if you're writing flash fiction, you're never going to be able to write them all. But novels, it's probably a year, usually. Or 10 years in this
for
case.
You.
Right. There's a sadness every time you choose what you're going to be writing because that all these ideas that you love are going to have to either wait their turn or more likely never get read.
Yep. That back burner. Oh my gosh.
Exactly. So there were countless revisions of this. This is the only book that I actually read the book when it came out. I've never read one of my books as a book.
Really?
And the reason I did it was because there had been so many different versions of it. And I finished it 2.5, 3 years ago that when I was preparing for the launch, I was trying to think about what passages I would read. And I was like, oh, there was that scene. Oh, wait, no, I cut that. I'm like, oh, but how about, oh, wait, that's not it anymore. So some of those ideas I might reclaim because there were some central ideas that I, moved away from that are now available to me again that I'm still intrigued by. So, usually for a book of mine, I used to write, I would do revise as I went. So I'd write a couple of chapters and then revise them and then revise them and then revise them and then move on. And I don't do that anymore. Now, almost always I do my outline and then I start writing the first draft and I don't go back and look at any of it until
Wow.
I get done. And
Wow.
then I go back and revise. And I'll do that a couple of times, send it to my agent. We'll go back and forth a couple of times, and then she'll, bring it out to market. Hopefully it sells. And then you're working with an editor, and, so then you go back and forth 2 or 3 times with the editor. Then you get the copy edits. And then finally you get the first pass, which is when you get the kind of a photocopy or a PDF of the typeset book. And now you're really just kind of proofreading, supposedly.
Right. Nice.
I've been known to make a few changes, late in the game. Making friends with the typesetters.
I don't see a problem with that at all. So was there a subplot that was sacrificed that you left on the back burner, but maybe made the price of everything a better story? Or is there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, originally, so as it is now, the main character, the protagonist, Pierce, he's a courier. He's part of this Couriers Guild. And earlier versions of it. So, and part of the book is that there is, in the wake of the cyber war, the corporations around the globe said to the governments, basically, you're not protecting us adequately. We're going to kind of take over. And there's this body, Unicon, United Conglomerates, which is like this United Nations of large corporations. And that's who really owns everything. And that's who's calling the shots. The initial versions, the main character was a cop. And the premise was that, most of the world's militaries had been privatized. All the companies were owned by the conglomerates in this Unicon, and the police forces around the country were starting to become privatized. And of course, since the corporations weren't paying any taxes, the local governments couldn't afford to pay the cops. So when the corporations say, hey, you know what, we'll pay the cops were like, great, we're gonna make a livable wage now. Yeah. But now they're answering to these corporations instead of answering to the city or the state or whoever. And the premise was that the way this takeover was occurring was through contract buyouts. And for various reasons, this one cop, he was like the last one who had, resisted the buyout. So he was getting paid a third as much as everybody else. He was still getting paid by the city and answering to the city. And, he was like, he had this desk in the basement of this like mostly abandoned building just off to the side. But because of this, he was like the only one who was willing to look into crimes that implicated these corporations. And I really liked it. I really, really liked it. I had a very hard time killing that darling. They say you kill your darlings, and that's, because invariably when you're revising a work, you're going to come apart bits that you wrote, that you love, that you think are brilliant and beautiful, but that really don't serve the story, and you have to get rid of them. And what I tell my students, and I always do this, I've almost never gone back to it, but I'll create a cut file. So everything I take out, I paste into another document, and that I know those things have been removed,
Still
and I know
survive.
that I have them in case I want to go back to them and use them for something else. So what I tell my students is, you don't have to kill your darlings, but you might have to lock them in the basement for a few years.
So this book is kind of like your worst nightmare of possible what is happening in the world, because it's happening in real time.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel?
Yeah, it's unsettling. It is unsettling, and I've had it happen. I've experienced this before, never quite so starkly.
Vividly.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, well, no, I probably shouldn't. Well, we had a very solid movie deal in place. And it basically got killed because of it probably would never have happened anyway, although it was really solid and pretty far along.
Yeah.
But a couple of the studios who turned it down basically said, yeah, we don't want to be antagonizing billionaires right now. It is, I think we're in a very fraught political, social moment. And it's really alarming to see how many of our corporations and media corporations are kind of falling into line in a way that I really
Completely.
would never have expected that they would. Just incredibly short-sighted.
And I know you're very into activism for, I don't know how many decades. And so looking at that kind of aspect, and I saw the list of donators and the corporations and the companies that donated to the inauguration and whatever is happening. Do you find ways to somehow make a statement, getting away from those companies, getting away from giving more money to those kind of companies?
Oh yeah. I mean, I worked for decades at a food co-op, a nonprofit food co-op, and I started when I was like 17, and I ended up being the communications director and published the newspaper and all that. And I loved it. It was very important to me, and its mission was very important to me.
Okay.
And in this book, it addresses a lot of this stuff, so,
wow.
So it is very important in my work. It's important in my work, but it's also, I mean, we basically we don't use Amazon. We try not to, we shop mostly at the co-op. And there were places where I used to spend a fair amount of money, which right now I'm not spending any, because of moves that they have made in the last 6 to 8 months. My wife is very committed to it as well. And yeah, we try to walk the walk,
Yeah, it's important. And it's scary because now in LA, with the deployment of our military that are, Marines for deploying to foreign lands are now landing in Los Angeles. It just frightens the hell out of me. And I thought, I have, coworkers that are like, you got to get our asses out on that protest, but I'm scared shitless to stand out there.
No, I know. Well, yeah, absolutely. And I had a book signing scheduled for this Saturday, and I just yesterday, rescheduled it so that I can go march, because I think it's important. You gotta show up. And apart from anything else, just like let the world know that we are not okay with this. That while there are some people who might be, that the majority of us are not. And also to let these corporations who are kind of submitting, kowtowing to this government, all these like lawsuit settlements, and it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. So letting them know that the vast majority of the people who are out here do not approve of that. I think it's important as well.
Yeah. Did you have real life people that you kind of formed characters around in this new book?
I rarely do that. I mean, I think it's all it's very rare for a character to be based on a specific single person.
Okay.
For me, it's more like you meet people, people, they're all going in the well, and they're all contributing. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I mean, that said, in the Splice books, the premise was near future genetic engineering technology has matured to the point where it's available on the street as a form of body modification, and you get these disaffected young people who splice themselves with different animal genes to alter themselves in different ways and for different purposes. For some, it's like an edgy fashion statement. Some, it's kind of a statement of solidarity with the natural world in the face of climate change and mass extinction and that sort of thing.
Wow.
And there is a billionaire businessman who wants to who is running for president, and he
seriously.
I know, shocking, isn't it? So this came out in 2017, but was written in 2015, I guess, 2014.
Oh my God. You're a little scary, Jon.
Well, yeah, right. So he seizes on them as a wedge issue and kind of forces through Congress a poorly written law saying that anyone whose DNA is not 100% human is no longer legally a person. So they lose all their rights as a person. And so that guy was based on somebody. He was kind of a cross between two somebodies, because he was a tech billionaire. But yeah, so sometimes that does happen. But mostly, But the vast majority of my characters are kind of created from whole cloth and informed by all the people who have been unfortunate enough to cross my path.
Uh-oh. in kind of a closing thing, what do you think is kind of like a mission statement from The Price of Everything?
I think part of it is beware of letting the corporate sector get too powerful. That a strong public sector is important. And I'll tell you, like politically, I'm not like a particular ideologue. And I think the reason why is that I think that on a practical matter, kind of the mishmashes of all the political philosophies are generally the best way to go.
Yeah.
I think that capitalism for the most part is, capitalism and democracy for the most part are good. I think both of them are kind of, the least bad, systems that we've come up with. But I think that unfettered capitalism is a nightmare. It's just it's unbridled evil. And I think that the other extreme is true. Like totalitarian communism, it's like, yeah, no, it never works out, So I think in the middle, we've got kind of capitalism with a lot of regulation and democracy that is fettered by a constitution, and that is kind of eased with a powerful, strong social safety net, and that like regulations and some degree of socialism. I think having like no degree of socialism, again, it's like, no, that's evil. You've got children dying in the streets, So yeah, so I think that people who are like, all this, it's like, yeah, no,
You got to find that middle ground that supports all of this stuff. You got to have the people with money, with capital, to fund the stuff that takes care of those that are unfortunate and can't fend for themselves. And yet it just seems to fly in the face of extreme polarized views, that the idea of slowly trying to come together to agree that this part is bad and this part's good, do something about it. Really tough. Really tough, especially when there's money involved. I mean, like you said, it's the billionaires that just want to hold on to that really tight, but God forbid there's enough for everybody,
Yeah, I know. It's insane. And it's insane, how much richer they've gotten in the last 10 years.
Disparity.
And that's like that money comes from somewhere, and it comes from us. It comes from our cities and towns, and our healthcare and everything.
Right.
So it's bad. So I think that one of the ideas in the book is that if we don't like address emissions and avert the worst of climate change, then it's either going to be utter climate collapse or some kind of geoengineering scheme, which could have all sorts of unintended consequences. It could be hugely destabilizing globally. I mean, it goes on and on. Right. The possible downsides to it. So yeah.
Do you ever find this all this research you're doing and all this crazy applications that you're finding out just depresses you? I mean, do you have to like pull yourself out of this psychological thriller that you're in your brain?
No. And the reason, so here's
tell me about the hope. Tell me about the hope.
Well, for that, as far as the hope goes, well, I don't want to give away the ending of the book.
No, don't.
And it is kind of a controversial type of hope.
Yeah.
But when I'm writing my stories, I think of it as fiction. So, because it is. And it's informed by a lot of things, but it's fiction. Yeah. So when I come up with a great idea about how terrible things can happen, I am giddy, because, because that's me. But like the depressing part is when it becomes real, and it happens again and again and again.
Yeah.
And
which I guess could fuel the more the activism, could fuel the more empathy, and fuel the conversations that we're having, so that it's out there and people don't feel like, well, I think it's this or I think it's that and that's wrong. There's so many perspectives. I think the worst thing to do is to be silent about it.
Yeah.
And not talk about it.
And I think, at this moment in history, so many of us agree at least that much of what's going on is wrong. And I think it's important at this moment in history to forget about all the stuff that divides us apart from that. We can get back to our regularly scheduled arguments once the current insanity has been ended, and we've had taken a good solid look at ourselves and wonder, asked ourselves how we could have let this happen in the first place. So yeah, the fiction doesn't make me depressed. The news makes me depressed.
Okay. And then on the topic of ever evolving technology like AI, what are your thoughts when you hear let ChatGPT finish your book?
Oh God. Yeah, that's a real sore point.
Yeah.
There's a, I think it's great. Anybody who wants to be a writer should write. I'm very supportive. But there's too many books as it is,
Yeah.
and there are,
A lot of books.
I do not disdain indie publishing or self-publishing or anything. A lot of my editing clients are very successfully self-published, and they're writing really good stuff. But I think that if ChatGPT is writing your book, then you haven't written a book. ChatGPT has finished this book. So when it first came out, a friend of mine, Eric Arneson, who's a very talented crime writer, he writes short stories and books about gaming, like board games, and he's a good pal. He when ChatGPT first came out, he was like, exploring it, and he asked it to write a chapter of a thriller in the style of Jon McGoran.
Oh.
And he sent it to me, and it was hilarious. I mean, it was, it wasn't great, but it kind of nailed it. And I was like, wow, that's impressive.
Wow. Yeah.
But of course, a year later, I find out that, of course, all of my books had been scraped and scanned and fed into this thing.
Oh.
So my books were in its database. My books had been stolen and used to train this technology so that it could replace me, and that's, so much of the dynamics of AI are about that, I'm not a Luddite, I'm generally science fiction. I was a science fiction kid, and I'm generally pro technology. I'm pro the responsible implementation and use of technology. I think there are some applications such as weather forecast and, designing, novel proteins that could lead to medical breakthroughs. There's a lot of things that AI, even generative AI, does really well. But I think that billionaires stealing authors' work to train a technology so that it can ultimately at some point be used to put those writers out of work. And at the same time, like I said, I do think that there are uses for AI that are beneficial and appropriate, and that are not doing something that humans can do, and not doing something that humans can do better. But apart from anything else, the environmental costs of AI, we're coming to understand now, are astronomical. It takes huge amounts of energy, massive amounts of energy. I mean, that's one of the things, the human brain is remarkably energy efficient for what it does. If you look at the consumption of resources for the output that you get from a human brain, and you compare it to ChatGPT, it's many orders of magnitude, So you've got Mark Zuckerberg wants to buy and gear up 3 Mile Island and get those, use some of those reactors solely to power his AI.
Wow.
Yeah, for people who are on the fence, which I am. I mean, I think that there are some uses of it that they're an ill. They make society worse. They make publishing work worse. They make living as a writer, being a reader. All this. There's this Israeli company that was bragging. They made an announcement they were going to be like publishing 10,000 books a year, written by AIs, and they think it's great. I just think it's reprehensible. But so there's bad applications or utilizations. I think there's good, appropriate applications, utilizations. But I think that when the environmental component is entered into the equation, especially as we're staring down dire consequences of climate change or climate collapse, then I think it's essentially a no-brainer that we should be using this stuff much more sparingly. Because also, like, almost all the utilizations of it, except for those few that I've answered, nobody's asking for it. It's like every time you open a Word document, this like robo-clippy comes up, and what do you want to do? It's like, I want you to leave me alone so that I can write, Yeah, exactly. And and there's also, it's like so much of it is bad information. It's like again and again and again, people are using it, and it's just in these kind of factual applications, real life applications, like medical journal articles and
Yeah.
and like legal briefs and stuff. We've seen again and again and again that it's just like, oh, I'll just make some stuff up.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not. It's definitely. I think there's a lot of strikes against it, and also I think that everybody jumped the gun. One company released their half baked AI, and everybody else wanted to catch up. And I think that's generally not a good recipe for a responsible rollout of a technology.
Well, and people are finding it more and more difficult to find the facts. Is this true? Is it not true? How do I know? I'll ask the question and I'll get this information. I don't know where that information is coming from, just generated by whoever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Wikipedia or whatever that is.
Yeah, yeah, right.
You can put in whatever you want.
So, one thing that I do now is every time I search something on Google, I'll put in my search term and then add at the end -AI. So I get no AI overview or anything, at least for that first. If you add something or tweak it, you have to do it again. But yeah,
Keep
that has
in
helped
mind,
a lot.
listeners. Put that end at the end.
-AI.
-AI. That's fabulous information. Okay. So that's a wrap for today's chat on Family Dynamic Conversations podcast. A huge thank you to Jon McGoran today for joining me and taking us deep into the world of The Price of Everything, out now on Solaris Books. Please look for it and buy it, pick it up. It's a thriller that challenges how we think about trust, technology, and the costs of survival. Please check out his website, jonmcgoran.com without the H, and find a list of his genre-bending bio-thrillers. You've written how many books? 10, 11?
This is my 11th, and then
11.
two I've ghostwritten a couple as well.
My God. So if today's episode got you thinking about the future we're hurtling towards, or just left your pulse racing a little bit, go pick up the book, share the episode, and let us know what stuck with you. Please check out all of Jon's books. I have Drift, I have Dead Out, and that was backed in 2009, and we'll talk about that some other time. Don't forget to subscribe, write a review, and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, keep the conversation going around the table and beyond. Thank you, Jon.
Thank you, Janice.
That's so great. Yeah, it's fun.